Hello, greetings everyone. Let me know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so we have to start now because this is not going to be the normal class where people just come as at when and we wait for like 5 minutes. Someone had to wake up. I There was a little bit of mistake from my end during the confirmation and organizing of the program. Um, Our brother here, my friend, Senna, is based in Beijing, China, and he had to be up now because it is 2 a.m. in Beijing, China now. So most of us, if we are asked to attend class at 2 a.m., he won't be up. But now someone is up at 7 p.m. But this is a low turnout. We've never had, in fact, 2 minutes to our class. We always have like from 50 persons in class, and at the end, it's always a big turnout. So we can't, because of such, um, keep our dear brother and friend waiting. So we have to get into the conversation proper today. Um, I'm not going to, unlike others that I try to give background to, some have not also because of how the amazing work that they have done, their background and all that. So it's always interesting to allow people who got multi-layered history of importance to talk a little bit about themselves before getting into the conversation proper, right? So most of the things that we have been doing with Afro longevity is mainly to situate healing, because medicine is whatever that brings healing. To situate healing in our closer to our biodiversity and our bioavailability. And our brother here is schooled or in African medicine before traveling to China to study Asian medicine or Chinese medicine. So he's one of the best respected persons in the lynch. One of my friends, old friends, is based in the States and linked me up with him and stressed that we must connect and do something together. So today it's a privilege for me. It's also an honor to have him or having him in our midst. Thank you so much, Asena. I yield the mic.
Thank you very much, brother. And it's an honor to be here today. My name is Sena Vonkujovi. I'm joining you from Beijing, China. But I'm sure a lot of you will be wondering, why is a guy in Beijing, China dressed like this? I saw in the chat somebody said we are going to learn about Tai Chi and many things. So I'm actually Ghanaian Japanese. My father is from Ghana. My mom is Japanese. But my father is a traditional healer. His father was a traditional healer, and myself and my many siblings are all traditional healers in the Ebe Afa and Voodoo traditions. And for those of you who are in Nigeria, this is quite similar to Ifa, but then we're talking about the version that exists in present day Ghana and parts of Togo and Benin. But I'm from Ghana. And I've been living in China now for 3 years, physically working here. Before that, I studied here briefly and I was researching the relevance of Chinese medicine to the rejuvenation of African medicine. And I'd like to share a little bit of my thoughts here today with you and some of my research and some of my insights. And it's a great, great honor for me to be here, and I am very honored that this invitation was extended to me. And this is the reason why, despite it being 2 a.m., I felt very compelled to be here to share and also to learn from you all, not just having a monologue. And so I hope that we can have a very interactive session. Please be, chatting in the chats, ask any questions, and it'll be a pleasure to connect with you professionally on LinkedIn, on WhatsApp, and just see the ways in which we can be supporting the Afro longevity movement. As I see, this is very important. So, in this presentation, I'm going to be talking, it's entitled My Afro-Asian Medicine Journey, very loosely. And the person you see on the right is me when I had a little bit ponytail. And this photo is taken in Kyoto. And we're dressed up as samurais. And, and my brother Pele is on the left-hand side. And we took this photo to kind of keep a good memory of our ancestral roots, because on the Ghana side we come from traditional healers, but on the Japan side we actually have samurai roots that go back 500, 600 years. And so today my presentation is entitled My Afro-Asian Medicine Journey. And what I'm going to be talking about in brief, in terms of the agenda, will be a little bit about my background, my education, what I do here in China, or what I've done in the past with regards to my professional career. And I'd just like to put out, I am not a biomedical or Western doctor, right? If anything, I'm a traditional healer, what people will call juju man, and I'm very proudly so. And I hope that through this presentation and some of our insights here, we could reimagine or rethink the role that traditional healers can be playing. And I'm sure you've all discussed this, but then I'm hoping to share some insight from an Afro-Asian perspective. I'll also be talking a little bit about traditional Chinese medicine, and what I discovered that was relevant to African medicine in Beijing. And then a brief introduction about the worldviews in from a Voodoo or Afa perspective, which is, the perspective within which my traditional African medicine practice is situated. Because I think it's very important that we look at things from a worldview perspective, not just the pure biomedical perspective, because this influences what it is that you look for, who you decide to look information in, what information is legitimate and not. And many times the conversation around traditional medicine is not just a biomedical or scientific one. It is a political one. It's sometimes geopolitical one. It's a policy one. It's a regulatory one. It's a legal one. And so there are multiple angles within which, when we talk about traditional medicine, it's important to analyze. And one of the most important things, I think, on the fundamental level is worldview. So I'm going to be briefly talking about the Voodoo Alpha worldview that influences medical philosophy and medical practice within the area of a practice. And then lastly, a few conclusions. My presentation is going to be asking a few questions to you guys, so I hope that when we do, you will respond or you ask. But and also, I'm going to be sharing some videos to keep it lively and to show you rather than just tell you. So bear with me, and I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I hope you have questions. So, who am I? As I said earlier, I am Ghanaian Japanese. In the photo, you see my graduation. I with my mom and my father wearing Ebe Kente, which was recently protected under geographical indications, I think by UNESCO or somebody. But this was a very proud moment for me personally, because out of my siblings, and I have 13 siblings, I was the first to be able to go to college, and then eventually graduate. But then my family journey goes, it's a long story of how I came into being. And so in this photo here on the right, you see on the left, you see my father. As I said, is a traditional healer. And then on the right, you see my mom when I was very little, and with my brother. So the brief history of our family is that I was born in Japan, in Tokyo, but at the age of 1.5, our family moved to Ghana. One of the main reasons for that was um, my parents, especially my father, was very concerned about how we as Black Japanese people will be treated. And there was a lot of racial discrimination, and there was a lot of, bullying of people of African descent or mixed Black, especially mixed Black heritage. If you were mixed with European descent, you were mixed with something else, you will be looked at very nice, whereas we are Black. And so, my father being a very strong Pan-Africanist and very rooted person, felt that it would be a better idea to raise us in Ghana instead of Japan, so that we could be very confident. Because, as you know, in if I was in Nigeria, I would be called Uibo, and in Ghana, I'm called Obroni. And in the majority of Africa, I would be called a white or a foreign person. But then everywhere outside of the continent, in America, in Japan, in Europe, or basically everywhere outside of the continent, I'll be considered a black person. And then he felt that it's very important for us to know our African roots and to really be comfortable where we come from. And so the family made a decision to move to Ghana. When I was around 1.5, my brother was less than a year old. And so my Japanese mother, my father relocated from Tokyo. My mom ended up living in Ghana for about 24 years, living and working in Ghana. And my father moved back, and he, developed more his traditional African practice. But living in Ghana was amazing. It's a great experience. But one of the things that we often experience from a very young age was due to my father's spiritual, herbal, or traditional healing practice. We were very discriminated and marginalized, right? Like, as you all know, you to go to a good school on the continent, you either go to a good Christian school or Muslim school. As far as I know, I've not seen any traditional African religious or traditional African herbal medicine school where healers' children can go and get the best formal education. As far as I know, those things I have not yet seen them yet, at least in public. And so we went to school being, because my father was very, very proud to be a traditional healer, having been to Asia, lived in Asia, and kind of rediscovered his African roots to come back to really take this seriously. And so we were always known as the voodoo children, or the traditional children. And, our teachers would often call us devil worshippers. Sometimes I would argue with the whole class about the validity of traditional practices and traditional healing methods or traditional spiritual understandings, and often met with a lot of disdain and intolerance. You talk, for me, I didn't understand why, when I write about when I write about African deities and I put them in a capital G, you get marked down grammatically, versus you have to, when you write the Abrahamic God, you have to write it in a in a in a in a big G. I think these are some of the ways in which language starts to make us look at what we do as less. And I went to a Christian school. So this is the environment within which I was raised in Ghana. I mean, this is not the only, it's not a bad thing. It is what it is. And I really enjoyed my time being raised in Ghana. And there's so many wonderful experiences. And in many ways, Ghana shaped who I am to this day, and is, what I do. I'm serving the continent or serving the country in myriads of ways. But I just wanted to share a little bit about the context within which I'm coming from many years ago. And as I shared earlier, I'm one of 13 siblings. So my father has 13 children, not same mother, same father, different mothers. And we come from three generations of fine voodoo healers, which are known as bukos, which the Yoruba equivalent of that would be a babalawo from the Yoruba tradition. Okay. Um, so with regards to my educational background, I have my first degree, not in science, but in international politics and economics, and a minor in African studies, and kind of like a sub minor also in religion. And I studied in America in a small college called Middlebury College in Vermont. And there, it was a place that I really started sharing extensively some of my um, experiences within the ABFI and voodoo traditions of herbal medicine and also spiritual practice. And this really shaped the way I looked at the global relevance of what it is that we do. Because before, when I was in Ghana, the reality was that when you talk about African spirituality or African herbal medicine, often, if especially if we come and talk about it from a traditional healer's perspective, it's never really taken seriously, right? And part of that is the marginalization that um, traditional healers face. As I said, part of it is the academic, or let me not say the formal education level, and then the I call it propaganda, is because it does what it is, because it was a that was deliberately created by colonial powers, and also popular culture, whether that's Nollywood, Hollywood. But um, I found that outside of Ghana and outside of the continent, the things that I was sharing were looked in very much more positive, inquisitive eyes than on the continent. And, one could argue, well, because they don't know what is happening on the ground. I would argue that the majority of people who hold opinions about this also don't know what they're talking about with regards to African traditional religions or African traditional spiritual practices. They could quote somebody of what they've done or what they heard, but they could not mention one specific practice or one traditional healer, one incantation, or one worldview from an indigenous African perspective. What they can tell you is mostly Abrahamic perspectives of what African traditions are. And so people who say that to me are ignorant and they don't know. And so there's a gap between what the reality of African traditional healing and African spiritual practices are versus what popular perceptions are on the continent. And being outside of the continent really made me contextualize that in a very beneficial way, I would say, to my life and to my community. And so, whilst we were in the US, we developed a program or a project called a Revolution, which stands for the Voodoo Revolution, Voodoo Education. And it's basically a digital platform to try and educate the world about African herbal or West African voodoo and Afa herbal and spiritual practices. The reason why we put herbal and spiritual practices together is because traditionally, from a philosophical perspective and a worldview perspective, these two have been intertwined. This dichotomy that you see between spiritual practice and herbal practice, this, in my view, is more of a Western invention that comes as a result of secularization and this rational thought in the West. But then traditional and indigenous communities, not just in Africa, but in all societies from China to India to the Native Americans to the Celtics, almost all indigenous cultures do not make this separation between medicine and spirituality. So when we start to look at African medicine today in this modern time, and we do not understand the original base of it, but we are talking about African traditional medicine, it's important to also understand the worldviews and the spiritual, or yeah, the spiritual views of the context within which these traditions originate, and why it is the way they are, why it is that the herbs are named the way they are or are used the way they are. It is not just a purely physical thing, even though many practitioners or medical practitioners today would like to claim that, and often as a traditional healer, we hear say, "Oh, you know me, I like the tradition, I like the herbals, this thing, but the juju or the spiritual that one, I don't like it. I want to." That perspective or that way of looking at it in and of itself is colonially influenced, and many people don't even know that, right? And so part of the reason why we created the revolution was to try and demystify this, right? Earlier I mentioned that we have a problem of many people having opinions, very strongly held opinions, religious opinions, scientific opinions, social opinions about what the tradition is. But you do not really have a lot of practitioners' perspectives being featured into popular culture or in the mainstream or at least even digitally. Definitely not so when we started this 11 years ago. And so we created this project. We invited a team from America to come help us to do it. We visited about 6, 7 different temples in multiple traditional healers over a 2 week period. We intensely filmed over 144 hours of content, and we made a film. And this was a project run by our family, the Vonkujovi family, at our temple, the African Magic Temple, which is based in Accra on the Spintex Road. And we decided to create films, articles, projects, photo exhibitions to just really share and demystify herbal and spiritual wisdom of the Ewe people and largely West African people through storytelling, films, and social media. Um, and I'm very proud to say that after 11 years of doing this, we've managed to build a community of over 30,000 um, virtual community in over 50 countries worldwide. And, our academic resources are used at some of the most renowned institutions, from the University of Ghana to the University of Oxford, University of Columbia, Peking University in China, Tokyo University, and multiple other universities and other academic resources, or even herbal tradition resources as an authentic view and an authentic perspective of traditional healers. And so it's called Revolution. And if you have an interest, please, you can look this up online, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. We're very active on this. And so fast forward in 2020, I got an opportunity to study in China. Um, Mind you, I'm Japanese, Japan and China have no love lost between each other. They have a problem with each other. They don't like each other because of their colonial past. I think even yesterday, some guy in Japan broke into the Chinese embassy in Tokyo, and now it's a whole diplomatic issue. But then I went to China, and I went to Peking University. And one of the reasons why I decided to study in Peking University was this topic of traditional medicine. And I had learned briefly that China had a traditional medicine industry. I knew that in Japan there was a very vibrant traditional medicine industry, but then the origins of Japanese traditional medicine came from China. So I was like, oh, this is very interesting. I want to learn what the relevance of Chinese medicine is to the rejuvenation of African medicine, right? Like, what are the lessons that we can learn? I was not interested in just learning traditional medicine for the sake of traditional medicine. I was interested in learning the relevance of learning Chinese medicine so that African medicine and the medicine that we practice in Africa, or as bokors or healers, how do we make it modernized, right? Because that's what we're all thinking about. How do we integrate traditional medicine more and more in public healthcare systems across Africa in a way that deliver the health outcomes that we want, or support the very serious conditions that we have on the continent, where over 97% of our pharmaceutical ingredients are kind of imported from abroad, but we have natural resources. So, from an African development perspective, from an African healthcare perspective, being able to leverage traditional medicine is very important. But then there are very few examples, at least on the continent, that have really done it at scale that we've seen. Some countries are doing it well, South Africa, even to some extent, the mini herbal institutes. But then China, to me, was a very fascinating country as one of the first, if not the first, medically pluralist states that integrates both traditional medicine and Western medicine. And I wanted to learn more about how that process happened, right? From the perspective of traditional healers and from a geopolitical policy perspective and so forth. So I was at Peking University studying there for 2 years doing my master's, and I also served as the editor-in-chief of the Peking University Africa think. And the Peking University Africa think tank is the oldest student-run Africa think tank in China. And so I was co-author to a report that was called the 5,000 Mile Report, in which we covered not just traditional medicine, but multiple angles and perspectives on China. And I'll give this as a caveat because I think this is important in this time. As you know, like China is becoming more and more relevant, and whilst I was working in Japan after graduation, I kept on hearing people China because I was working in the Japan Africa space, and people always said China is trying to recolonize Africa. China is using debt trap diplomacy in Africa, trying to steal our infrastructure. China is trying to um, take away our data. China is bringing illegal immigrants or migrant laborers, taking away African jobs. Um, these are accusations, or if I'll say, these are the headlines that we see on the continent as well as on CNN and BBC. And I was very interested to study that topic myself rather than just listening to the news. And so, as you can see in the table of contents in the middle right here, you see a lot of the research, not just by me, but many China experts. And these are African students and African China experts that write and analyze this perspective from multiple angles. And what I realized was that a lot of times these headline statements about China don't often cover the truth, right? It's not as black as white, and many people think there's usually more gray areas and nuances. And we are using data and multiple perspectives from both Africa, the West, and China to analyze China. And if you're interested, I can definitely share that perspective with you. And if you follow some of my work, you can see some of my non-traditional medicine related works and analyses on China, Africa. But in my opinion, now having studied in China, or lived and worked and studied in China for about 5 years, half a decade now, I think China is one of the biggest trends of our century. Anybody serious in development should understand China, just as, when we're growing up on the continent, whether you like it or not, you're going to learn about London, you're going to know something about Paris, you're going to know about New York. Now China, Beijing is the new New York in the sense of its relevance. And the easiest way to prove that is look around your room. How many things or things include things of China in there? And that alone should tell you that it is a mega trend, whether you like it or not. And my perspective is if something is such a mega trend, it's important as Africans to understand it and to be able to leverage it, to be able to advance strategic Pan African interests, and not uh, accepting that is delusional in my view, just as not accepting the dominance of Western supremacy, Eurocentric thought, or white supremacy in the world, if you may, or even biomedic medicine or Western biomedicine in the world is also delusional because the power dynamics are just against none. And I want to tell you a story. It's a story in Afa that I think captures the way I understand how Africa should be dealing with very big powers such as China or the US or whoever, where the power imbalance is so big, right? There's an Afa story in the Odu, and Odu is like the chapters of Ifa or Afa. In Ebe we call it Letesa, or Yoruba will call it Irete Osa. But in the Ebe oral history, there's a story of a competition, and I write it in this thesis or in this thing about how the frog won the race against the horse, right? How did the frog win the race against the horse? And it said that there was one time where the frog and the horse were in competition because the ancestors of the frog had a piece of land, and then the horse's ancestors were trying to take it, right? Or the two, not the they were disputing over some land of who is the legitimate owner of this land. And so the frog said he's the owner, the horse said he's the owner. And the elders were kind of convened and they said, okay, whoever can win the race can win and will prove to be the winner of this land. Sure, they agreed. But then the frog, he knows that no matter how much he tries, his capacity can never be as strong as the horse. So what does he do? He consults the elders, he consults Ifa, he consults Afa. And Afa tells him the same thing. Like your capacity, you can never overcome this if you are going to go pound to pound, as we say in Ghana, or toe to toe. So Afa says that you have to use the strength of your adversary or your competitor to your advantage. So when the race starts, try and attach yourself to the horse. And you have to go with that strength and that momentum. And the race was such that it was like you race and then somebody's supposed to sit on the chair. So on that, and then when you sit on the chair first, you are the winner. So on the day of the race, the frog, he listened to what Ifa said and he said, okay, no problem. So as soon as the race started, he attached himself to the horse's tail. So the horse, he think that, oh, this one, he has won the race. So he started running, kitty, 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 pa, 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 pa. But by the time get to the end of the race. Quickly, the frog was already at the back, so he just quickly jumped after that. He sat down. Now he claimed the land. Everybody's clapping that the frog has won. I think there's a profound wisdom in this sort of proverbs or this sort of story in Ifa or Afa that is relevant for us as Africans as we develop. Because when we think about it economically, politically, there are many ways that, yes, as much as we may have and we should have cultural pride and pride in what we do, we should be very realistic about the power dynamics that are at play, whether that's coming from the East or the West. And we must find ways to leverage the momentum of what is happening from our competitors or from people who are more powerful than us, and then be able to leverage that to our advantage and strategically be able to exit when we need to exit, just as we see in the frog. And this is my perspective about how I believe Africans should be engaging with China, US, or other powers, or how we as proponents of traditional medicine should be thinking about advancing traditional medicine, leveraging the strengths that we can get from everywhere, but then being able to strategically coalesce when we need to, and then exit when we need to advance our strategic interests. So that's briefly on why I came to China and some of the perspectives that I learned as I am in China. But I would like to briefly talk about what it is that I was exactly researching as I was in China and some of the insights that I came to discover, right? So I wrote my thesis, as I mentioned, on the relevance of Chinese medicine to the rejuvenation of African medicine. And my thesis was asking four main questions, and I'm sharing them briefly here. Um, Namely, how has Africa and China leveraged traditional African medicine and traditional Chinese medicine to fight against COVID-19? Because my research was based on during the COVID era, literally between 2020 and 2022. And number two, is the visible popularity of TCM in Africa only attributed to China's diplomacy to expand its influence or more a result of African agency? This question is really influenced because based on the literature, we see when we see TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, pushed in Africa, we get a lot of pushback from the West, the economists, and even African stakeholders sharing that this is merely propaganda from Beijing, and and not something that Africans really want. Some people go even a step further to argue that this is just unscientific medicine being propagated that is dangerous, right? And so the research question I was asking was to evaluate to what extent is that true, right? To what extent actually is China's diplomacy or Chinese health corporation in Africa, what are they doing on the continent, and how much have they done so in the past, say, 50, 60 years? And to what extent are African stakeholders themselves engaging to propagate Chinese medicine on the continent? So, to what extent is it just diplomacy? To what extent is it actually African agency, or an example of African agency? Number three, since I was in COVID era, I interviewed about 150 Ghanaians in Accra, and the question I was asking was, what are Ghanaian local perceptions and usage of Western, Chinese, and African medicine in this period? So not just local perceptions, but also local levels of trust, right? So we're asking. This was, yeah, I think the vaccine was about coming out at the time, but we were asking people how it is that they were treating medicine, not just for COVID, but in general. But what would they use Western medicine for? What would they use Chinese medicine? What would they use African medicine for? And which one did they trust more, and why? And how? What did they differ in their thing? And the results were quite interesting. And, I found that a lot of African people use Western medicine for pain alleviation, or, yeah, painkillers, and things that require quick effectiveness. And they are indeed very effective. Whereas when people got a lot more chronic illnesses, they did not want to use drugs as much. They wanted to have herbal alternatives, or even go completely herbal, right? Many times because they felt they didn't want to be drugging themselves with chemicals. And as we know, Africans are very religious and spiritual people. Many people view traditional medicine as God-given medicine. And so if they had a choice, whether or not it's effective or not effective, that's what they prefer. Many even doctors in Ghana would have preferred African or herbal medicine to the COVID-19 vaccine if they were given that option. And I think that perception is very telling, in that perhaps we don't have the advancement in African medicine today as they should, or maybe clinically studied and publicly available in every place, and to the extent that we want. But then, if that opportunity is truly tapped, it is very likely that Africans will prefer a lot of that, and the market for that will be significant, from a health perspective and economic perspective as well. Um, but what we have right now is mostly Western medicine. Of course, there's African medicine, but it's still not as formalized as we could see. But there's a gap there, and that's something that I think that all of us here are interested in that topic. But then those are some of the things that asking 150 Ghanaian citizens during my research found. But yes, maybe we could do more than 150, but that's what I found. And then number four, in which ways is China's TCM experience relevant for the renaissance of African traditional medicine? And this for me was one of the most interesting topics. I found a lot of policy insights and just the development trajectory of Chinese medicine, that truly I felt was relevant for the African continent. And I found many herbs that exist. And one herb here, just on the right side, you can see this is the paradise seed, what people call alligator pepper. In April, we call this atakui. Yoruba people call this atare. This, this herb is a superfood. Most people on the continent don't know that it's very spiritually significant, but it also is a very superfood. And being able to see some of the scientific research on it, which I had not seen before, and how even entrepreneurs in Asia are making things like atakui or atari beer in places like Japan. This really changed my mind, and most people would not know this. But then, even this same seed is one of the key ingredients for this very popular gin called Bombay Sapphire. If you looked at the gin, it's like crystal blue. I think it's a London dry gin. Bombay Sapphire has many herbal extracts, and paradise seeds are one of them. So whether or not we are talking about Afro longevity and we're talking about wellness, I think that's very important. But then in terms of the commercial value, and marketing it, and creating an industry for it, being able to leverage the strength of useful and high potent African herbs to create products, even alcoholic beverages, I see this as something that is very unique. And over B here, we see a tea. This herb is called the Xanthillium cinerum. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the spelling, but in April we call this Hunsikonu. The English name is little ironweed. I was surprised to discover that little ironweed also exists in Thailand. And in Thailand, it's listed as an essential drug in by the Ministry of Health. And why it's listed as an essential drug is because it's able to stop people who smoke from craving cigarettes. So it acts as a anti-nicotine or like smoking cessation treatment, right? And it's been clinically studied and clinically proven to decrease urges in smokers. Hello? Yeah, I think somebody is busy. But this herb can be found in almost every corner in your street. You can probably look around your street if you're in Nigeria, Ghana, or wherever you're on the continent. You can find this. You can also find this in Thailand. You can find this in Japan. You can find this in China. And it's often sad to see that we have all these resources around, and other people have been able to study them and use them, and not just use them in a DIY capacity, but use them in a very public health and even economic sense. Whereas we are stuck with thinking that our herbs are just weeds, or a lot of the public health system looks at that and they're not really interested in learning from these herbs and leveraging and institutionalize them properly. So these are some of the conclusions that I came from my thesis that really changed my mind about this. So you can see that in my thesis, on the left side, you see a photo of me in the middle of rituals with traditional healers, having to record all the herbs very frantically using AI, using imaging to be able to identify the herb scientifically, and then be able to conduct some secondary research and then see what is being done in the world, and what can be said about them, right? But then the base of my knowledge is coming from the traditional healers because they are most intimate with the herbs, and the healers are literally passing on or possessing custodians of wisdom from thousands of years that has been passed on orally. That has just not been written in books. But then that's what is important to realize, that African wisdom is not written in books. It's in the trees, it's in the songs, it's in the stories, sometimes it's in the dances, and many things that Western knowledge does not think is knowledge is where the African knowledge actually resides. And so when we look and only evaluate African knowledge, even herbal knowledge, from the perspective of West, like, oh, it's not written, therefore it's not good. Oh, these people didn't write it down. They must have been stupid. They didn't know what they're doing. That is, again, is a Eurocentric way of looking at African wisdom. And that people who think like that have not done enough real deep research on these African systems to really understand their strength, even if they think they do. Because when you go deep into it, it makes more sense why it is the way it is. And you will be truly fascinated and in awe of the wisdom of the ancestors. But you need to find good healers to be able to teach you that and tap that into. But when you look at it superficially, the superficial and the intellectually lazy argument is these people didn't know what they did, or they were uncivilized, or they were stupid. That is why they did what they did. The harder intellectual argument, and the correct one in my view, is to go a step further to ask why and how. and what can we do to recreate that and even advance it even more. That is the harder argument to make and the correct one to make, but it's the true one to make. The lazy one is to just follow the same narratives that was colonially inherited by the Western civilizing missions to say that Africa was a dark continent and they didn't know what they need to do, and because they didn't write on paper like the West, that's why, or they didn't organize knowledge the way it was supposed to be organized in the West, that it's somehow less. And to me, this is absolute nonsense. And any serious Pan-Africanist who thinks like that, they're joking to themselves that they are Pan-Africanists. They need to do most self-study and go back to their books, and not books, go back to the elders, go back to the trees, go back to the rivers, they'll teach you. Um, One of the things that I found fascinating, as I mentioned to you, was that there are a lot of herbs that are in China that exist in in Africa as well, and that many of them have already been used and are already being used in this billion-dollar plus or multi-billion-dollar industry here in China, but not just in China. We're talking about Japan, we're talking about places like India, places like Thailand, right? So it's not just a China issue, right? And this is for me something that I see as one of the strengths of Asian African encounters or Asian African experiences, in that in many ways, if you go to the West, advanced traditional medicine is interesting, and there is definitely holistic medicine. You look at homeopathy and different things, but then the world view that they come from is very different, right? And there are many ways in which Asian societies, uh, and or maybe more, let me put indigenous societies, see alike, but I'm talking about Asia here, so I'll talk about the similarities. So culturally, the respect for elders, the religious or spiritual beliefs of nature, right? The respect for ancestors. Like, these are things that are very deeply embedded in both African and Asian countries at large, or at least we talk about places like China, places like Japan, places like Thailand, and even to an extent places like India. And therefore, their healthcare systems have played, at least in Asia, has placed a lot of significance on herbal medicine development. When you go to many Western countries today and you try to advance traditional medicine or herbal medicine, you will get a lot of pushback saying that it's fake or unscientific medicine. Whereas in Asia, you come to China today to say that traditional medicine advancement, this is common sense to most people because most people grew up using traditional medicine in conjunction with Western medicine. The same could be said in a country like Japan, which has the highest, we talk about longevity. Japanese people live more than everybody in the world. That is a fact, statistically speaking. And the Japanese medical system is very much based on traditional medicine. If you go to Japanese medical school today, you have to do courses on traditional medicine and be able to apply it. They have understandings of when to apply traditional medicine, its strengths and its weaknesses, when to apply Western medicine, its strengths and weaknesses. My cousins are doctors, my uncles are doctors, and they have this thing from their basic medical knowledge, right? You can get traditional medicine at the counter of the DIY counter by yourself anywhere all the time. There's some medicines that are so developed or from traditional medicine that you wouldn't even know there's traditional medicine, but their root is traditional medicine. They're using a lot of um, innovation technology because often traditional medicine is very bitter, right? But then to make the user experience even better, they know how to honeycoat it or package it. And so there's a lot of innovation in traditional medicine space that you will never you is very difficult to find in the West. And this is why, for me, looking at Asian countries as a model for learning insights is very important. And the fact that we already have African herbs that are in Asia makes that case to me even stronger, right? But in China, one doctor quoted me, they have about 3,500 species of plants. That's the basis of their multi-billion-dollar industry. In Africa, we have 6,000, which means in Africa, we could argue that we have even a lot of plants that the world doesn't know. But then this is why I think it's very important for students such as yourself, professionals such as yourself, to be able to, work together and really invest in learning about this and then publicizing this very widely so that people can understand more and more the value, inherent value of traditional medicine. And this is exactly what China also did in their own medical system, right? So I'll briefly talk about what it is that China did. As I said, brief history, similar to how today, and I'm sure all of you who are interested in herbal medicine have experienced this to some extent, you're going to get some pushback from people that say herbal medicine or traditional medicine is quack medicine or there's no future in this because you're fighting the tide of modernization, and many people often think that traditional medicine is backward. We disagree. But then most people don't know that even in China, that was exactly the same thing. In Japan, that concept was the same thing. And when did it start? It started as these countries come into contact with modernization and westernization, right? And so for Japan, it comes when Japan comes in contact with the West, and then it starts to see technological advancements, and then they start to see, wow, we need to advance and we need to modernize, we need to industrialize. And if we don't industrialize, we don't become more like the West, we are going to be colonized or we're going to lose out. And so all facets of life start to change, not just dressing, not just the politics, not just economics, but also the medicine. And so Japanese medicine gets attacked as it starts to get modernized, right? Until certain people within the country decide, no, this is important. In China, that has a history of being colonized by Japan, right? So like China, they're much older civilization in Japan, right? 3,500 to 4,000 years of history. But Japan industrializes earlier in the late 19th century than China, right? China, until the Qing dynasty falls in the late 20th century, is not really industrializing. So China and Chinese scholars and Chinese scientists make the argument that look, this small country like Japan, like imagine like Ghana and Nigeria, right? Like Nigerians are they're the giant of Africa, let's put it that way. And then if Ghana is doing something, then Nigerians will be like, hey, if Ghana is doing this thing, small country like Ghana, we were even older than them, we're bigger than them. Why can't we do that? And if they saw that Ghana is like significantly achieving something, they'll be like, well, what is that? Well, how can we do that? And this is exactly how the Chinese felt when they saw a very modern and industrialized Japan. And so they start to say that the reason why we as Chinese people are backward is because we did not adopt the science, even though they had their own indigenous science. So they replaced the characters for science to use Japanese characters for science, not the indigenous uh, character for science. Even though the Chinese characters originally come from China, but because of this modernization, they start to say, no, we have to abandon what we have and we need to be like Japan, which is like the West, because if not, we cannot adapt, right? But there was a very interesting battle between traditional medicine and Western medicine because at this time they're trying to adapt, they're trying to industrialize, trying to westernize. And there's a group of people who say we have to abandon traditional medicine. And these are the biomedical people, the scientists, because that's backward and that's not where the world is going. And there's a group of people that say, no, actually the origin or the basis of medicine is based on philosophy. And then traditional medicine is based in Chinese philosophy. And so we need to develop that in tandem with Western medicine. And then what happens is that Western medicine is developed in tandem with traditional medicine. And in China, in the Mao era between 1949 and 2000s, they didn't have a lot of medical resources. China's GDP was lower than many African countries. Ghana was sending foreign aid to China right after independence because of the level of development on the GDP per capita was less. And so traditional medicine development was also a economic necessity and a healthcare necessity, right? They adopted many systems such as the barefoot doctor system, which was a system to use traditional medicine and preventative medicine in the rural areas to be able to provide basic healthcare to people. And this is the basis on what the WHO now calls healthcare for all or universal health coverage because of the success of China's barefoot doctors model, which said you can deliver very good health outcomes without having all these heavy, fancy technologies if you focus on preventative medicine and preventative care, and you're able to train even people in the villages who even just have a high school degree to be able to get certain remedies that they're using in Chinese medicine in tandem with Western medicine. And I think this is a very important thing for us as Africans to think about, that it's not the technology alone that makes healthcare good. It is about the methodologies, it is about the training, it's about the system and the institutionalization of these things that we see China did, which even at the WHO is being acknowledged. And not just acknowledged, but it became the basis of what the WHO now considers it is possible, even if you're a developing country, to be able to produce healthcare for all, right? I believe this is called the Alcatraz Declaration or something along the lines. But you can look at a barefoot doctors, like barefoot as in your bare feet, because these people were often in the villages, in the farms, but at the same time they acted as doctors. And one of my professors at Peking University happened to be a barefoot doctor back in the day, until later he also went and furthered his education. He ended up studying at Harvard, and now he's a professor of economics at Peking University. But he was a barefoot doctor when he was high school, something that everybody did. But briefly, I digress. I'd like to talk briefly about the four-step process that allowed traditional Chinese medicine to develop, which I believe is very relevant for um, African medicine. So what did China do actually? So given that they didn't have the same GDP or less GDP per capita than us, how did they actually move from a non-industrialized, poor country, unregulated, unorganized traditional Chinese medicine industry where they have 56 ethnic groups, just like many African um, multi-ethnic nation states from Ghana to Nigeria to wherever, where it's not just one people, it's not just one knowledge. How did they decide to make something into what we now call traditional Chinese medicine? The first step they take is something we call salvage. Salvaging the knowledge of the ancestors or knowledge of the elders by going to the villages, going to the traditional healers. And this included people who were magicians, or what in Africa they will call juju men. They did not exclude them from the data gathering process. And they really extensively did this across the whole China to say, oh, go, when you're sick, who do you go to? Can you tell us who you go to and who is a good healer? People go. Then they go to the healer, ask, how do you do? Sometimes the person said they need to do an exorcism about a ghost. Sometimes they said witchcraft, but then in that process, they still had the plants, and then they're recording and they're recording. Unfortunately, in Africa today, a lot of the people are very scared to go to the traditional healers. They say that they are juju people. And even the people who are supposed to be making these sort of decisions about African medicine, they've decided that juju men or so-called juju men are not worthy of study. They're not worthy of even going to consider that what is their potential contribution to African medicine. And the Chinese example shows that that perspective is nonsense, that actually going to traditional healers actually may be the basis upon which you can get actually traditional. And I would argue even more so in the African context, because we don't have written knowledge. We have oral tradition. So who are the libraries? These are the people who have been studying this thing from time and time again, and has been passed on for several centuries. So number one, salvaging. Number two, sorting, removing the dross, meaning in order to make traditional Chinese medicine modernized, they needed to be able to separate the spiritual stuff from the purely empirically validatable data. because they needed to make it modern, right? And so they start to remove this herbal wisdom and the spiritual wisdom from the herbal wisdom. So they are sorting out the data just as you would do in an Excel sheet. Number three, they synthesize that which can be synthesized into a modern medical body of knowledge that could be even taught at medical schools, right? So it's not just important to salvage and sort the information, but it needs to be synthesized in a way that somebody who has no background in this through a 4 year, 5 year, 6 year, 1 month, 3 month program like you guys are doing today can synthesize it and form a theory of that. Right? And that's where the academics will come in, curricula will come in, medical schools will come in. But it didn't stop there. It ended with an elevation. And the reason why the elevation, to me, is one of the most important parts of this is that originally, as I mentioned, they're dealing with biomedical, not just Western people, Chinese biomedical practitioners that are very against, or not against, but it's just skepticism, right? It's skepticism around the efficacy and sometimes the safety of traditional medicine. And they said that in order for us to be able to prove that traditional medicine or traditional Chinese medicine is important, then we need to study the science so much and then elevate it such that people can see, and we need to prove that it is valuable. We cannot just say it's valuable. We need to prove it through clinical studies. We need to be able to invest in research R&D. We need to be able to commercialize it. We need to advocate for it, right? And I think this is what we are doing here right now through forums like this. And that becomes one of the key elements that make Chinese medicine really succeed, and not just succeed in being able to show that it works, but then being able to have a viable commercial and market value that allows it to be sustainable and sustain itself. And to me, I see there's many similarities with voodoo medicine. But then one of the interesting things that I would say is that these 4 steps they take, these make traditional Chinese medicine be able to fit within what we understand, even in the Western sense of which the world right now is very Western dominated, and we should accept that reality and not deny it. But then, even to this day, the greatest Chinese healers, they don't just rely on Western methods or being able to analyze or being able to the chemical, this, that. No, they have indigenous Chinese methods of healing and diagnosis that practically you cannot find anywhere. And one of the examples is Ba Mai. Ba Mai is a process by which a person will use 3 fingers like this. They're going to place it on their hand. And when you place it, your pulse here, they are apparently, according to the Chinese ways, there are 3 different kinds of pulses that you can get by placing these 3 fingers. And they study the pulses, right? And through that, they can diagnose what is happening to you. And the masters, they can really go deep into it. You think that they are doing juju. I'm not joking. You think that they are doing juju. But from their system, they call it chi. What is chi? Chi is the natural energy that is running through a person's body. Western scientists say that that is nonsense. But that concept is the basis upon which Chinese medicine is built, right? And I'm sharing this example to show that, or share that, my opinion that as Africans, we need to leverage the strength of not just the herbs or the chemical compositions or the API or Western understanding or Western categorizations of what our herbs is, the lenses by which we are looking at African medicine. If we are only looking at it from a Western, no matter what we call them, and we are all wearing African clothes and we are doing African herbs, that is not going to you are not going to be better than the Western people in their own system. What you can do is you can leverage that system and then make it still strengthen your traditional system, including traditional methods of diagnosis, and really understand them. And then that gives us an edge against the world, because now we have something that they don't understand, they don't have. But if we keep operating within the confines of Western knowledge and just a Western lens and of African knowledge, you will never really win. And the Chinese example shows that. The fact that they use yin and yang theory, the fact that they use the five elements, the fact that they use Ba-Mai, the fact that they're understanding things in terms of Qi, which informs things like acupuncture. Is the whole worldview, is the philosophy by which they are using to understand their medicine. It's not just the chemical composition of the herbs, which oftentimes I see when we talk about African medicine, the focus has only been on that, which is important and it's understudied, certainly. But the real value that we as Africans can contribute is our also methods and understandings, unique methods of knowledge. And to do that, you have to go to the traditional healers. And you can't do that in the laboratory. You have to go to the bush and go and learn from the old men who really know what they're doing and ask the people who are real. It's not fake. Ask the people. They'll tell you who really knows how to heal and who's bullshit. If you ask enough people, you can know. But we have to get over the fear that this thing is just, oh, it's just you cannot go there. If you have that, we'll always be here and running around, and you will do this. The Western people will come and be schooling us in our own medicine. You cannot stand in with pride with what they are doing. So that's what I'm talking about. And one of the ancient African methods that one Dr. Diarra, who is a Mali professional who has a PhD in traditional Chinese medicine and is an honorary ambassador of traditional Chinese medicine and received presidential awards even from the president of Mali for his contributions to using TCM to save lives in Mali when there was no COVID vaccine. He talks about the significance of even things like herbal baths in healing methodologies and how he has incorporated herbal baths in China, where he practices as a doctor. It's a TCM doctor in Chengdu, right? These are unique contributions that we as Africans can make, and it's working for people. And on the right side, we have Dr. Nkrumah, who is a Ghanaian doctor who I met in Ghana, but is now back in China furthering his studies in Chinese medicine. And he is an acupuncture specialist. And he said, he was able to cure people with arthritis, people with whatever, and so many problems just using acupuncture. And acupuncture is significantly cheaper than using MRI and all of that. And to him, he was like, what we have is not technology. It's like people look at medicine as a technology issue, like how many computers can you buy and all of that. But like sometimes medicine doesn't need to be that complicated. And you can see it's better. And like his story, he said his mom was sick and she tried all the medicine that she could and she didn't find any solution. But then when he tried Chinese medicine, which is cupping and bloodletting, they were letting blood out through the suction pipes. She felt much, much better, right? And he was very happy about that. And so this is what got him interested in China. So he decided to go and study just Chinese language for the sake of Chinese language. But then whilst he was studying, his mom passed away. And when his mom passed away, he said, I wish that she could have done more of this bloodletting. And I wish I could be a doctor so that I could be able to have saved my mom because I saw what all the other things that they did not work in Western medicine, but the Chinese medicine really helped her. And so he decided to quit just being a student thinking about just going to study business. And he decided to go fully learning 6, 7 years Chinese medicine, start learning Chinese. And then when he graduated his first degree, he decided that he wanted to use that knowledge to come back and serve Ghana in the COVID era. And that's where I met him, and that's where he shared these opinions with me. And so his insight about sometimes medicine is not just about technology, it's not about MRI scans and how much technological advancement you have. Sometimes is body technology and being able to understand and being able to tailor suit certain solutions to people, right? My presentation is getting longer than what I expected, but I'll be skipping. So I think it's very relevant, and I think that African medicine is also relevant to Chinese medicine, and often Chinese scholars will see the value of African medicine because they see a lot of similarities with it, just as many African people will see similarities of Chinese medicine to African medicine. So to me, the case for the collaboration is very crystal clear. So what am I doing now? So right now I'm based in China. I'm working in education, but I also own my own company called Agama. where we are kind of a China-Africa development consultancy. And we advise Chinese stakeholders and African stakeholders, both in the private sector and the public sector, to advance cooperation in multiple areas from trade, but also with a specific focus on traditional medicine cooperation. And so recently I was representing Henqing and Macau at the Davos conference in Switzerland, talking about traditional medicine cooperation and some of the things that China is doing, or specifically Macau is doing, to advance traditional medicine, which I feel is very, very relevant to African medicine. So now I've been doing a lot of talking. So I want to show you a few videos to show you what it is that I've been doing.
China engagement of IFN and China and use that organization which presents an over 120 countries worldwide. He's also the CEO of Agama Advisory at the Beijing-based consortium providing AI-driven solutions for Africa and Chinese government and private sector stakeholders.
So did you know that the drug that we use for malaria today, that has saved millions of people across the world, including in Africa, has its origins in ancient Chinese myths? My name is Sana Mojovi, and it's a big honor for me to be here today. Davos is where we often debate markets, geopolitics, and technology. It is in this context that I'm honored to speak today, representing Macau, and to share why its development strategy, particularly in traditional medicine and health innovation, is relevant not only for China, not only for Africa, but for the future of global health systems. I speak today as the CEO of Agama, which is an African advisory firm in Beijing, focusing on China-Africa cooperation, but a specific focus also on China-Africa traditional medicine cooperation. But also, like many people here, I wear many hats. And personally, I am a third-generation traditional healer from the Ebe Voodoo tradition in present-day Ghana. Grew up in a household in Ghana where healing was practical and observational. Plans were tested over time, and outcomes mattered. My great-grandfather was a traditional healer. My father, a traditional healer. Myself, and my siblings, all these things. So as a researcher in China, I encountered something that reshaped how I think about development and modernization. Traditional Chinese medicine did not survive by resisting body disease. It survived by
Hi, Sina. The volume is off.
investment. This is where Macau offers some.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
That I feel very thankful
Yes.
about. Macau provides a space where traditional knowledge can be rigorously studied, indigenous practices can be validated without being erased, and global standards can coexist with cultural specificity. At Agama, our role is to help turn these opportunities into structured cooperation. Partnership with Macau is about ensuring collaboration that is ethical, evidence-based, and globally relevant. The future of health, I believe, will not be built by one tradition or one knowledge system alone. It will be built by those willing to integrate knowledge, test ideas, and work across cultures.
Yes, thank you. So the Henqing Macau thing, I want to share, instead of sharing the two videos, I think we already talked about malaria, but I want to share one video which I shared with our brother here on the way in which Chinese people are leveraging AI to advance and to create new drugs in traditional medicine, which I think is very relevant for us as advocates of African medicine, because we have limited resources, but then with AI, that really can change. And so after presenting or talking about what I shared at about Macau, I wanted to just show you a visual of what exactly is possible and what is actually happening today.
This is very interesting for me right now. I'm not listening. I'm so mind blown right now. I'm not listening. I'm not connecting to any discipline doing this traditional medicine. Let me tell you what we have here. We have a system, as an AI system that is built on large data, a lot of data of traditional Chinese medicine, Western medicine, which are integrated, and then it helps in the diagnosis and also even development of traditional Chinese medicine.
Platform for new traditional Chinese medicine drug development. The first I is intelligence, D digital, E engineer, A automatic. That is a crazy achievement.
So this system over here, apparently, it can do the work of 8 doctors that they will use 1 month to do in 1 day through automation. So it does various functions, and then it's all automated, so it works together in the development of new drugs for traditional Chinese medicine that are integrated or aligned also with Western medicine. And these are some of the drugs that in Macau they have already created. There are about 54 types of drugs that they created, and then they have all these systems and all these drugs, including drugs to help women's menstrual cramps, and then some eye-related problems that still doesn't have a cure in Western medicine. They have the traditional Chinese medicine prescriptions, and we've been able to make those drugs. And then they're using all these systems out here to kind of test them, make them safe, and then push them for export. So that's what Macau is doing to advance traditional Chinese medicine and traditional medicine in general. And that's, to me, it's just so fascinating. And it's going to be jumping out here like a little boy who's seeing some candy. They are going to help us with proper data. You can recreate what doctors can do with limited resources. That's truly amazing, at least in the context of African medicine.
So yeah, and I'll show you this because I mean, why not? After that, we can move more to a conclusion. But in addition to these AI, they also have the cultural element, and I think this is very important. It's not just the medicine; it's the culture, it's the worldview within which it's the people that advance these sorts of things. And so China, I found it very fascinating that they kind of share these stories and they have museums about this. And this video on the right is a cultural exhibition, which again is at the same zone, that talks about the people who created or discovered or made serious significant contributions towards the malaria drug that we have today. Oh, wait. Let's just do this.
This is very interesting for African people. This is Baobu, and here they are seen treating a girl from malaria using the herb Artemisia annua. And this is about 1,600 years ago. And they say you should squeeze it, put it in 2 liters of water, and get the juice, and then that can treat malaria. And 1,600 years later, Dr. Tu Yao from Peking University, she went back into these ancient medical texts, which is the prescription for emergence references by Gerhong, which wrote this thing down. And then she studied this scientifically, and that is what led to the modern invention of the malaria medicine we use today, which has saved millions of lives, including those in Africa. But then it was through the works of these people, Bao Gu, Gerhong, that we see these ancient Chinese medical texts and herbs being used even in modern times that have clinical benefits and have saved millions of people. So this, and Dr. Tu Yuya won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Many people don't know, but this is how they are honoring the ancient knowledge and the people that contributed to what we now know as the medicine for malaria.
Yeah. I'm going to move because we are moving in time, but basically these slides are talking about, and I think I've already captured this of, the ways in which our traditional knowledge has been really discriminated over years. And so when you think about why is it that you look at juju or voodoo or ifa or whatever it may be, and this is across the continent and across the African diaspora as negative, there was a series of many things, right, that banned African indigenous knowledge, right? And all the way in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, they said that people who were voodoo people or traditional healers or traditional spiritual practitioners were masters of poisons. And therefore, if you allow them to practice, they can even poison their masters. And so they put a lot of laws against that. There's a lot of mistranslation, right? And some of you may be Yoruba, Samuel Ajay Crowther was tasked to translate the Bible into Yoruba, and he decided to mistranslate Eshu as Satan, whereas Eshu is not Satan, and such a concept does not exist within Yoruba worldview. But then Eshu was translated as Satan, right? And so there's a big group of Yoruba cultural activists all the way in Ile-Ife and across the world that are trying to fight this mistranslation. And so when we translate many African concepts into foreign concepts, there's a lot of mistranslation involved in things that don't exist. And today I heard a very interesting statement that says, what is the Yoruba word or the Igbo word for pizza? Right? Like if you don't have pizza in your concept, like how are you going to translate the pizza? Like you can only describe what it is, but do you have a word for pizza? Right? You wouldn't. And so when you don't have a word for devil, or you don't have a concept of devil, and then somebody comes and then mistranslates it, it unfortunately leads to the whole. So this kind of fear around our indigenous knowledge or indigenous spiritual custodians who hold this traditional medicine, it is something that was very deliberately created. And it's something that if we really want to reimagine African medicine and to be able to be rooted in African knowledge that is uniquely African, it's important for us to really decolonize our mind around and understand some of the things. And I'll give you one example of what are the ways in which in Jamaica, the Jamaican Obia Act, which stop you from practicing African herbal and spiritual practices in the 18th and 19th century, 1898 Jamaican law. This Obia Act, it is still in place today in 2026. That if you practice this Obia or what we call juju, you can be banned, right? And it's because colonialists were so scared of the herbal and spiritual practices of black people, basically, right? And you can read it yourself. Every person practicing Obia shall be liable to imprisonment with or without hard labor for a period not exceeding 12 months, and in addition thereto, in lieu thereof, to whipping, right? They will whip you if you do. So when today you have this fear, or people are just immediately fear and don't question and don't have any actual real evidence, or they don't have any direct personal experience or stories, but they've just been hearing what other people are saying. And I'm not saying that things are not dangerous. Yes, things are dangerous, but everything is dangerous. It's like a knife. It can be used to cook. It can be used to kill a person. Anything that is of power, it has to have both ways. Just like a drug can be overused, it can be used for good. It's the same with traditional knowledge and traditional spiritual systems. But this fear that the majority of our people today can only look at this thing as backward or as evil. This is a deliberate colonial invention. And if we don't start to really understand it from that thing analytically, I fear that we are not really going to get to the way that we see places like China or Japan who do not suffer from that sort of colonial propaganda vis-a-vis their own indigenous knowledge or their indigenous systems or their indigenous gods or whatever you may be, because those things are linked in ways that people don't often want to acknowledge. Ifa or Afa is a treasure trove of African medical wisdom. Often people look at Afa or Ifa or Babalawo as only a custodian of spiritual wisdom, and this is not true. If you go into the Ifa corpus, of which I am a priest of, or Afa in my thing, you have certain Udu that have certain herbs, and certain illnesses will be treated on certain things. And the illnesses are not limited to physical illnesses. They can be mental illnesses, they can be social imbalances. And to me, personally see that this is a very big strength of African wisdom that is very difficult for non-Africans to just easily recreate, because this is very unique to the herbs that exist within our locality. And I can assure you, and this is not to put down anybody, but the specificity of understanding African herbs or African, even animal parts, to be able to leverage them in healing, it's just it's not comparable foreign systems to what the indigenous systems are. And a system like Afa or Ifa is protected as an intangible heritage by UNESCO, but then people only look at this as a spiritual system. And so in my thesis, I was making the case, and I argue often, and rightfully so, that Ifa or Afa is not just religion or spirituality. In Afa, there's literature. In Afa or Ifa, there's medicine. There is mathematics. There's a myriad of things that are in, and to look at it as purely just religious and spiritual, it is a reductionist way, and it's an imposition from a foreign lens of what religion, or the secularization between religion and medicine, in ways that did not exist traditionally within African societies, not just in Yoruba land or in Igbo land or in Ebe land or Ashanti land, but across all indigenous societies, including in places like China. This dichotomy between the secular religion and medicine, it did not exist. And you go to China, they have a similar system to what we call Ifa. So at the top, you see Ifa, which is with the Ijiobe, Yekumeji, Iworimeji, Odimeji, and things like that. And then the Chinese have a system called I Ching divination, which is also a binary methodology. And this system of I Ching and Tao, yin and yang, is this yin and yang system, probably saying yin and yang. The whole medical philosophy of Chinese medicine is based on yin and yang. This is why Chinese people drink hot water. This is why Chinese people, every herb they have, they can classify it as a yin and yang, and depending on the sickness that you have, they will say, are you lacking yin or are you lacking yang? Are you lacking the light or are you lacking the darkness? And depending on that, the kind of prescription they'll give you is different, right? And in Ifa or Afa, we have Obe and Yeku. The whole basis is binary, 1 or 2, with 16 chapters, 256 subchapters. That forms the oral corpus. And within each chapter of Odu, there you can even argue that there are another 16. So it's very, very vast. The Chinese system has 64 chapters, right? And so, like, for me, if you look at this as just pure religion, and most people don't even know this, and they're not even interested to know. And this way, I think our knowledge system does us a very big disservice to not be able to tell us the science behind or explore this truly intellectually. And they only look at it like, oh, this is against God, this is against, it is backward, oh, this is, but now this knowledge system is there and you have just thrown it away and you don't even care to look into it. And you have people, foreigners, who will come and look at the value and take it. And then later people will be arguing that, oh, a foreigner is stealing the thing. The thing is in your grandfather's house. You decided that you don't want to learn the thing, but you're here talking that somebody wants to take you to go and learn the thing. Who is taking it from you? There are people who are in these families, they don't even want to learn this thing. But that's why I think it's important to understand this in global context, not just from your little village, but what is the world? How does this similar system exist and how are they using it? And what are the things that we can take with this and advance it, right? And it's not to say you need to become an IFA practitioner or AFA practitioner. No. But you can look at it and study it and you can work together with traditional healers in a way that will advance this cause. Because I think definitely It is a multi-stakeholder initiative. It is not something that the traditional healers alone can do. It is not something that just the scientists alone can do. It is not something the legal and the lawyers can do alone. It's not something just the business people and entrepreneurs can do. It is something that multiplies multiple stakeholders, as we see in the Japanese, in the Indian, in the Chinese cases, that need to work together. And that's why this thesis that I wrote, or the research I wrote, was not just looking at it from a medical perspective. It's looking at it from a multi-stakeholder, even geopolitical perspective, and a colonial perspective or decolonization perspective of when is it that we decided that some people's knowledge is actual knowledge, whereas other people's knowledge is religion and superstition. Because that is the framework within which we have to start to decolonize first before we can start to say we are truly advancing African medicine to stand on its 2 feet and not merely be a copycat and an Africanized version of just putting some science behind African health, because that is not the real strength, in my personal and humble opinion, right? But I'm not a doctor in the Western sense. So, in conclusion, my critical reflections are that no one person or system knows it all, right? There are things that African healing systems are very good at, and it has its strengths and its weaknesses, right? And there are things that Western systems are good at, and they are not good at, whereas there are also things that Chinese systems or all medical systems are no. And no one system truly knows it all. And I believe and know that there's truth and wisdom in all corners of the world. Two truths can be true at the same time. Unfortunately, sometimes the ego hinders spiritual and human development. And I'm going to tell you a story. I'll close off with a story in another Alpha story. And sometimes you look back. When you look back, you can find the solution. So the story that I'm going to close my presentation with today is a story in Afa Odu Iwodi Ogunda, or in Ewe we call it Woli Oguda, Woli Ogodo, Woli Ogodo. And Woli Ogodo says that there's knowledge in everywhere. And it starts with the story of a spider that wanted to gather all the wisdom in this world and decided to put it into a gourd, right? Do I have a gourd here? But you guys you're from, you know what the gourd is. So you put it in a gourd. And then he said that he's going to climb the tree, and then he's going to store that knowledge there so that nobody can take that knowledge, and only he will be the smartest and the wisest in the world. This is what the spider said. And so he put the gourd, he put it like a chain, then he put it on his neck like I'm wearing this necklace. And he decided that he's going to try and climb the tree. And if you can see the photo, you can see me participating in this process of putting the gourd in my front and then trying to climb the tree. So when the spider put the thing on his front, then he said, oh, he tried to climb it, but the thing was heavy and he couldn't really grab the tree well. So he kept on failing and failing and failing. But he had gathered all the knowledge of the world and put it inside. And then he decided that he was waiting. And then he saw a dove. A dove was perched up and looked at him. Said, Mr. Spider, why don't you put the gourd at your back like this? Like turn your back and put the thing on your back. Maybe when you put it on your back, you can climb. So the spider put the gourd on his back, and then he decided to climb. And he was able to climb. So when he got to the top, he said, oh, this is good, good, good. So he wanted to tie the gourd with all the wisdom. And before he tied, then he realized that, if truly I gathered all the knowledge in this world, why is it that I didn't know this? And somebody else from a dove have to tell me that I should throw it on the listing. So, in fact, then I don't know everything in this world. And that it's not possible for one person to really know everything in this world, or one system to know everything in this world. And so the spider decided to take that gourd and then to break it on the earth. And in Ebeafa, it is said this is how wisdom spread across all corners of the world, right? And some of the conclusions I was sharing earlier share profound wisdoms. And the last one is that sometimes looking back is where the solutions are, not always looking forward, right? Looking back so that we can have strength in the present or in the future. And in my view, sometimes our ancestral traditions hold a lot of wisdom that are often overlooked. And in the context of traditional medicine, I believe this is a time that we need to work together to understand this even more. I thank you very much for your time, and I'm sorry for going a little bit overboard, but this is a very passionate topic of mine. So I thank you for your time. And I would love to.
Yeah, my brother, it was a privilege. Remember the last time we spoke, we wanted to have a quick call, and it lasted over an hour. We were talking, and I had to, because there is a professor that I'm working with, an African American professor that I'm working with on the rite of passage. So we had to spend time at Kwamaimai Market. I think Neti, Kwamaimai Market in Gauteng. So I spent a lot of time there. We went to so many traditional healers to understanding the rites of passage. And the rites of passage differs from um, tribe to tribe, because African, we are divided along tribal lines or ethnic lines. And as such, that is how our spirituality is also. But there is always a central thing that brings it together. You find similarity in the practices, right? So those rituals, the right rituals, sometimes I try not to mix up things. There was a traditional healer that I was discussing with. I never knew that this guy is a friend to your dad. So he's from Imo State. So he's a friend to your dad. And he was he said, "How did I manage to know you?" And I told him my story. Oftentimes, there is something that most people don't know. And here is the truth. There is healing in plants, and most plants listens. Most plants, the efficacy of the plants is not about the phytomedicines. The efficacy of the plants is how you communicate to the plants. Most plants, to activate its energy, you need to speak to them. That this is what I want. This is what I want you to do. But I don't like to mix up my scientific parts with all these things, because most persons might not understand it. You need to speak to the plant, and some plants don't work in the morning. Some plants don't work at night. Some plants you need to, so when they are sleeping, they are not active. The potency begins when they are awake. Some plants don't appreciate it when you take them from with your left hand. Some want it with the left hand, some want it with the right hand. Some plants, before you take them, you need to wash your hands. You need to wash your hands,
And sometimes
because
you have to go naked.
yes, it depends. Yes, sometimes once you wash your hand, because you don't know, because most herbs don't want you to. There are people that you interact with. Some traditional healers don't shake hands. There are people that you interact with. It corrupts your energy. There are people you embrace. It corrupts your energy. So that's why before you move out, you have to purify yourself. You have to be at a particular state of being. So when people talk about traditional practices not being so spiritual, or there is no righteousness or holiness in it, it's really funny, because you have to be at a particular state to really interact properly. So when we were doing that rite of passage, I met with a traditional healer and in South Africa. So we had this conversation. This man is so spiritual. He taught me a lot of things. He said it's not every spiritual houses that you enter. Most of them will tamper with your energy. That's why you have to be in certain frequency, and they can sense they can sense your energy, they can sense your relevance. So that's why you don't just shake hands anyhow. You have to be at yourself. So sometimes you have to just bow to people and then move your way. So, and he told me that's why most elders, most men walk with walking sticks, or they hold something in their hands. And so they just use it as a way to navigate that ways of handshaking. So that once you see them, they can just tap you with that and they go their ways. So he introduced these things to me and he encouraged me to just be myself and try to be a holy person, you know. In Igbo, we say "Nsobogu." So being in the right element is a path to righteousness. So these are the things that we need to really understand. And there are some sicknesses that unless you disconnect the spiritual link, you won't get healed. This sounds very funny and complex. There are some sicknesses that herbalism will do everything, it won't cure. English Orthodox medicine will do everything. We do screening, and you will find out the person is okay, but the person is dying. Practical example, it was my dad's sickness, my dad's situation. And I don't think I find it funny using my dad as example. But yeah, it happened to my dad. But we did everything. We spent a lot. But when we got to the traditional lens, you know, the way of finding out. Can you guys hear me? What the problem is? So we did the Ijwes, what they call the APA. Then we found out what the problem was, diagnosed, and we did the thing. Guess what? He started recovering from that day. His system started accepting and processing medication, the herbs and the English medicine that was administered. It was a holistic approach. So there is dynamics. Our environment is totally different from the Western environment. How energies transfer is totally different. How the society, most of the time, it might not be a problem you cause to yourself. It could be a hereditary cause, a hereditary problem that needs to be untied. And by doing so, you save yourself from, you cannot be looking at problems and just be looking at approaching it in single lens. So I think I wouldn't want to go into detail. I'm not the teacher. We have the experts here. Please, it's time for questions.
Is it
You can raise your.
please, can we take is it, I don't know. Please tell me if it's possible. Can we take a photo together?
Yes, I can do that. I can do that. I will do that right away.
That would be very, very, my community would be very happy. And I would
okay,
love
just
to really share here in China, how vibrant the class is with regards to, the many participants. With
yeah.
that maybe in the future, some of you could also come here, but I would like to make the case visually. So if everybody is okay, you can, I don't know, maybe you're in some place, but if you can briefly turn on your camera so that we can take a group photo on Zoom, I'll be very,
Okay.
very, very, very grateful before we continue the discussion, because I know some people may leave. I
Okay.
can stop sharing my screen at the moment.
Good. Can you stop sharing your screen? Oh, see, Nettie, I've not seen you for a long time. You are not a person. You must bring my you must bring my herbs and my vegetables. I'm coming to Lipopo to take all of them. I'm taking
You'll
again.
definitely get that. Definitely. Mukusha, Mukusha, you'll get that.
Yes, I'm coming for it. But this time, Neti, I'm spending more time in Limpopo. I've asked you to get me an apartment there. Don't know what you're doing.
I'm
Just send a list.
I'm pleading with everybody who can, so that we can have a positive representation of Africa, because this is not just amongst ourselves, but having a good photo, or at least as many cameras on as possible, will make an impact.
Yeah.
That would help advance what it is that we are trying to do.
It's
In
going
addition,
to also, Senna is going to send a message that we don't always have electricity. I hope they understand.
Charlie.
Thank
Thank you very much to everybody who has.
Load shedding. Even in South Africa. Next year you have load shedding.
Wow, it's a lot
That's
of people.
old news from us.
I know. So let's just get that done now. Well, some persons that are not in this class, if you are invited to China and you are not here, the odd is on you. Okay, I think that's all right now. Um, yeah, thank you. It's time for question. Um, let's get the question. Sydney Osai, ask your question.
All right, thank you very much. I know if you can hear me.
Yes,
Of course.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Sincerely, maybe today is today is if not the best of all these lectures. Sana, I want to appreciate you.
Thank you.
Also, I want to appreciate you. It's very, very awesome. I said one thing, I said we must learn to decolonize and deconstruct our minds and worldview because we cannot continue this way. A lot of things have happened. But quickly, let me just ask, whether in Ghana or in Nigeria, I want to ask, do we have African traditional medicine schools that one can, maybe an organized one, that one can learn, one can go and study? Because while growing up, even in the university, I studied biological sciences, I majored in botany, and I did my project I did ethnobotanical survey. So I have a little insight, and all what Senna has been saying is just all what I have in mind all this while. But somehow the system looks so disorganized that you don't know where to go. So please, I ask again, what is the way forward? Do we have centers, or one must travel down to China in order to get this knowledge? Please.
I think that if I can answer very briefly, it depends on what it we mean by organize, right? Can we organize it in a modern sense that is on an Excel sheet? Maybe some people have it, but they are not sharing it. At least I didn't have access to that, right? I mean, I've seen there have been many amazing African ethnobotanists that have done a lot of job in this, but then being able to tie what the traditional healers are saying versus what the scientists are saying, I think this is where the value can come in, right? And I don't think we need to travel to China in order to do that. My whole thesis was written not in China because it was during COVID, right? So I was in Ghana when I wrote this, right? It was just the inspiration came from China. Now, going back to my original point of, is it organized? And I ask, what do we mean by is it organized? Because if you go to a very legitimate and a very competent traditional healer, whether that is an Afa healer or an Ifa Babalao, then you'll be amazed, and I'm not joking. You will be amazed whether you are at the PhD level, the level of organization that is in that man's head alone. Like you cannot understand how a human being can compute so much knowledge in their head. And that is something like if you don't really and I encourage everybody to do, if you don't know, do a little bit of research on how Ifa knowledge is organized and even the way in which specific odus are related to specific herbs. That is a brilliant form of organization, but it's oral, right? So now if we want to make it applicable to modern medicine, then those of us that are healers and those of us that are ethnobotanists and scientists and writers need to come together to now create that body of knowledge. And this is where, in my presentation, I was talking about the Chinese medical system that says they are doing the sorting or the salvaging process. bringing the healer's knowledge, bringing the scientific knowledge, and bringing it together. So yeah, right now we don't have that, but that's why we should do that, right? And nobody else is going to do it. And I believe those of us here, we work together, we will be able to do that sort of thing, right? But
All
this work
right.
it requires a lot of passion
Yeah,
because it's not easy.
if I may, I think, Sina, we had that conversation and we talked about finding a way of collaborating. I had a vision of having something of that nature, but it's going to be like a holistic integration because everything got its place. There is always a meeting point between herbalism, traditional medicine. When you talk about traditional medicine, it's not the same thing as herbalism or botanical medicine. Let's get this clear. Traditional
Yeah.
medicine look at the intersection between herbs and spirituality,
Mhm.
between natural and metaphysical. But herbalism look at the efficacy of herbs. Look at botanical medicine, look at the phytomedical and the phytophysics of it, the reaction of the herbs and all that. Now, South Africa got something like that. They have indigenous knowledge systems in their university. And I remember at the course of our events last year in KZN, when we approached the university and the convention bureau, the state at the provincial level, one lady asked me, "Oh, see, you want herbalists or traditional healers? Because I'm not comfortable with traditional healers." And I asked her, "What's the problem with traditional healers?" So she was like, those people do all sorts of things. They kill chicken and they do boo, boo. And I was confused. I said, okay, but we are looking at a meeting point, right? I want to find a way where we can deconstruct what is being done there because there is a method. And if you don't follow that method, you won't get it right. Right? Um, um, scientific method also follow process. So there is always a process. It must be like 1 plus 1 equals to 2, 2 plus 2. If you don't get it right, you won't get it right. Now, when Sina was talking about the level of knowledge, that knowledge is not what you go to school and do 4 years and then they give you certificate. In gerontology, we call it intergenerational knowledge. Intergenerational knowledge. This is a compilation of ancestral teachings over the years, transferred to one person. Like it is from persons to persons, and you can serve someone for over 10 years and you've not gotten all the knowledge. So, and the knowledge now becomes progressional. The way you practice spiritual things, the more you know, the more you continue progress. So this is how this whole thing happens. So it is African knowledge system is more or less intergenerational knowledge based than curriculum based. But what we can do is to systematize it. I have some professors and University of Northwest that uses that are experts in intergenerational knowledge. So that is just that. So it can only be us that will be able to make this thing happen. And another thing is that we need to understand that schooling is just an aspect of education. Education is holistic. It is an integral aspect of understanding and translating reality. That is the core base definition of education, understanding and translating reality. So when those people can understand and translate, all we can do is systematize, and the question should be the ability to systematize what is being understood and translated. So that is where we come in. And this is why we are here for those who are interested in this type of knowledge. Everybody must not do it. So it can be hectic. So those who can do what they can do can do. Those who cannot do, everybody cannot do this type of thing. So it's very important when I reached out to Senna for to include this teaching in this program. I knew that there was a vacuum. There is something that will be relevant in this type of teaching. Thank you so much. The next question here is from Chioma. If she is still here, Chioma. Chioma, are you here? Okay, Eki. Okay,
It's
Chioma,
Chisom.
go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Chioma.
It's Chisom. Okay.
Chisom, sorry. A
I
lot.
was just waiting. I wanted to be sure. Okay, good evening. So I wanted to, so why is this is actually interesting, right? I've been a Catholic from birth, but there was this moment that I had recently when I went to Ghana in November 2025. So I find it a bit strange, and I see it a bit like it's a metaphysical. Sorry to use that word. Oh, I'm not sorry to use the word in this class. So it's more like I had okay, so the trip I had in November was like the only trip I had in the entire year. I went by road and I entered Ghana in the night. The bus stopped us at the marketplace. I don't know, Senna will know the marketplace, But then again, before we alighted at the market, there was this herbalist that was sitting right in front, and we got talking. And honestly, this herbalist escorted me because it had been a while I went on a road trip to Ghana or anything. So I was all alone. So the herbalist escorted me all the way to the road because I was going to La Palm Royale, Ghana. So he actually guided me to where I was able to get. This is around 1:30 in the night. So I was asking myself, I asked him a few questions because he was wearing some amulets and things. I don't know if I call it amulet, but he had some things he was wearing. I was asking him question. He told me his mother is actually, I think he said Methodist, and she's a women leader, but this runs in their family. So I got really interested. So when this class came on, I was just looking at you. I was seeing you, Senna. I was seeing my friend, the herbalist as well. All of you are kind of like, people who find themselves in families where you are endowed with this gift. So, and I was looking at him, a young man who is not even up to 40. And I saw that I'm not scared of him. I'm not even scared. I wasn't afraid. For me to even take that trip, I was no longer afraid of anything. But my own was just, how can we, because what he is worshiping, or, where, they do their thing was on the stream, in the stream by the riverbank. So I wanted to know the connection between what he is doing and then what your own revolution, if I can say revolution, I want to know the contrast or the lines of where these two meet, because I know that he's a good guy. For him to even want the taxi man to make sure that I get to my destination, he even still chats me sometimes, how are you doing? So, being Catholic and then having to understand that this person is a good person, not even afraid it's going to do anything to you. I'm sure not everybody can come to that understanding as I do. So that's why this class is interesting. I have children, but I'm also interested in knowing how I can intercept this information, how I can deliver it to my offsprings, how I can nicely make it, because the way we are taught to, jettison these things and see them as evil and see them as not the way of God. So I don't know, Dr. Kalu, I think you get my point.
He is also making sense of it, but we have Ndemiri also in Nigeria. We have people worship um things in the forest, people in the river, some in their ancestral chi, you know. But I think I will let him answer because I what I speak of is on the Igbo worldview. Yeah, Sina.
Thank you very much for your question, and thank you very much for your kind words. And it's very heartening to hear a Christian person speak positively about a traditionalist, and I'm happy to hear that you've had a positive experience. Now, I do not know this gentleman, and Ghana is we are smaller than Nigeria, but it's not all the traditionalists that I know, given our the work that we do. But things like you say, the stream traditionalists often and almost all the time respecting and honoring and working with spirits of nature. So whether that's the trees, whether that's the mountain, whether that's the rivers, whether that's the sea, whether that's the herbs, and almost all ethnic groups have their own individual names of how they practice. I come from the Ewe voodoo tradition of the present day Ewe people that exist in the eastern part of Ghana, parts of Togo, parts of Benin, and I think even in western part of Nigeria, that they have people, I believe they're in Calabar, every people are there. So that worldview is influenced by, every realities. Um, and but then there's a similarity across many African traditions, and this goes to talk about the long history of African people trading with each other, learning from each other, in many cases also marrying from each other, and also the migration of African people, such as the Great Bantu migration, which is why we have certain linguistic groups across the African continent that are similar, or even artistic depictions that are similar. And this is representing many, 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 many thousand years ago of migration and mingling of African people. And so when we say African spirituality, it is possible to say African spirituality based on certain principles that many African or most African spiritual traditions or traditionalists, the framework is operating from that. One, there is a creator or a group of creators, right? It can be one, it can be like the Trinity in Christianity. We have spirits of nature, the respect of ancestors, and the concept of an inner um, chi or a destiny or inner spirit that exists with every person, right? The Yoruba people will call that Ori. In Igbo, we call that Ese. The Igbo people will call that Chi. Shanti people call that Kra. So some of these concepts, they also exist across many African traditions. It's not limited to Igbo people. So to your last question on how can you learn about this, I would say right now we have the benefit of social media, and there is a lot of information and good traditionalists that are trying to teach. You meet people trying to scare you and say this, do that to scare you, or to tell you, oh, you are going to get quick money, all those sort of things. Those things are more scams than reality. And you should ask them why they themselves are not richer than Bill Gates if they can make you quick money. Then we have to use and physical judgment, even though we talk about spiritual things, we shouldn't over exaggerate that which does not need to be over exaggerated, and we can be real. But there are real people that are there, not just in Africa, but around the world. Um, and these days, more and more, been seeing that a lot of them have been online. Many of them sharing and being able to teach people what is the real thing from not the real thing, or who to go. And you hear a lot of testimonials from different people. So I think it's a good time for people, and a lot of them are on TikTok. 10 years ago when we started Revolution, there was no TikTok. We didn't see that. But now almost every Boko I know is on TikTok, and they have a lot of followers and they love TikTok, you know. So you can find a lot of information. And I think for your children, I don't know how old they are, but they will definitely be raised in a social media era, I hope, or I think. And so they can find that. But I think it will start with you doing some of your research. I'm happy to share my blog with the class, so that you can read some of my work if you are interested, um, and and through that you can find some concepts that you can go on. Like right now we have the internet. There's a lot. Once we have an open mind, we can learn more and more, and I think that serves the purpose of what it is that we came to this class for, which is advancing herbal medicine.
Okay, thank you. I think we there was a question that someone had wanted to ask question. It's been a long class today. Ah, excuse me. We started. We started 7, 8. It's past 9, like 2 hours, right? So now, Nettie, you're going to close the class for today. Before our brother Jamike, someone had wanted to ask a question, but I would like to add there is a problem. In the age of singularity, there is what we call scarcity of information or knowledge. In the age of singularity, it means that in the age where there is acceleration of information, there is always scarcity of information because there is a mix up of truth and falsehood. So with digital subculture and separation of ideas, it becomes problematic for someone to see if you don't know the right people to go to, the right place to listen, the right people to listen to. So I think it is better for people to start organizing information for their kids and for the kids and all that. If it depends on the internet, just store the internet for you to get things done. You might be hooked up with the wrong, person, and that's just the gospel truth. So, our brother Jamike, please, can you ask a question? Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Sena Mercy, for this section. And it's very enlightening. Actually, I'm a Christian and I still am, but I'm an open mind to learn because no one has monopoly of knowledge. I come from a background of healers also because my uncle was a healer and he healed a lot of people before he passed on. But my auntie was also, but nobody has been able to step into their shoes, maybe their children these days. So how do one coming from such a background bridge the gap and try to bring together that ancient knowledge that is almost going to extinct? What would you advise? How do one bridge that gap? This is something that is inherent. My uncle was a rainmaker. He had a lot of influence. Both maternal and paternal uncle, they were all traditional oriented. But how now in this generation, asking for myself, how do one be able to bring that gap to revitalize that knowledge and export it?
Thank you very much. And I think that's a brilliant question. How do we revitalize the knowledge that is almost going extinct? And I find your knowledge or your background as a traditional healer and your uncle's background as a rainmaker quite fascinating. And I'll tell you a brief story of what happened in my father's case. So, my father's great grandfathers were healers. His father was not a healer directly, but his direct grandfathers were. And my father actually was born in a Christian home. But he was interested in Christianity, in traditional knowledge, and so he went to all over the world, including Japan and things like that. And the simple answer to this is, I think it's important for us to be the change that we want to see in the world. And I think that's what we learn, or I learned a lot from my father, that if we want to change the world, first we have to change ourselves. So if we want to keep this knowledge, then either we ourselves are going to push to learn this knowledge and go and find these people, because there are people like that. There are still people who do stopping rainmaking, which I have observed many times in my own lifetime. So there are people like that. But then if that is a priority for you, then you go to the bush. If it's not a priority for you, you sit in your house and then you look only online. But um, so we have to be the change that we want to see, and I think we have to invest in the youth. I think we have to demystify the traditions so that people can understand. So what is rainmaking? What is this? What is the actual significance? What are the deities behind this? What are the tools that they use to be able to make it, right? And even if one may be born naturally with a gift to do such things, or a gift to be inclined towards such things, to really become a great healer, or to be a great rainmaker, or to be a great traditionalist in any field, it requires training. I think spirituality is 1/3 innate, inborn, and then 2/3 cultivated, right? The herbs that you have to learn, the methodologies, the mannerisms, the rituals, the techniques, all these things are things that you learn from people who have walked the path before. And if you are lucky, you can meet them. And some people go a long time and they can't. But if you really, that's your desire, you will find them. I am very, very confident in that ability, that you will be able to find them. And they are still there. But um, if you don't prioritize it, then it is true that the traditional healers will die. And in my lifetime, I have seen many of my elders pass on also. When they pass on, is like a library of knowledge. What I find very unfortunate sometimes is that sometimes even the children of the traditional healers are not taking the thing serious, in the sense that they see it every day, or because of the social conditioning and marginalization with regards to traditional healing, they are discouraged from going down that path, or society tells them, like, people don't understand how difficult it is to really be a traditional healer, and like the kind of marginalization that you get um, from whether that is economically, whether that is socially and religiously, where you will be alienated. And in some very negative cases, people are hunted as witches or whatever. Me, I was in high school. Some women will tell you they cannot be in your life if you are a traditionalist. It's not possible. I mean, to now when I look back at it, I'm happy I dodged the bullet. But so, like, the way we talk about these things, I think, is the biggest thing, because when we are able to have more cultural pride, yes, and also respect, mutual respect, that we're not saying everybody needs to be a traditionalist, or everybody needs to religiously believe this thing. We need to create a culture of religious or spiritual tolerance, such that a Christian person can be with a traditional person, learn from each other. That we can go to the church, they can come to the shrine, we can go to the mosque, and that community building will change the image of our own history and our own knowledge, such that maybe the youth will be interested to say, oh wow, I want to learn this, in a way that, for example, I grew up having watched my father struggle to find this knowledge, and that was broken in the family. And then he had to self study and go and learn from multiple elders traveling. Like, when I was growing up with my father, like, my friends are going to nightclub or going to this thing, like, we were going to bush, we were spending time with the elders, mosquitoes are biting us, but we're learning it. And um but I have no regrets about that. I it's some of the most beautiful experiences that I have had, most profound and happiest moments of my life were with elders, learning from real masters who, some of them never went to school, who will be considered illiterate in the Western sense, but in the traditional sense, they were absolute masters that even the people at the highest level of education could only dream of doing what they did, or they would have to say it's not possible because they just cannot comprehend it. But that to me, I grew up around such people because of my father's sacrifice, who dedicated his life to learn and prioritized his time to learn. So I think the simple answer is we should be the change that we want to see and dedicate ourselves to the things that we prioritize, and not just about spirituality, but even in this field. If we are interested really as Africans to make traditional medicine rise, then we have to put the time and enter the trenches and work together with people and also support people. Sometimes it's not necessary that you start something, but you see somebody doing something and you decide to put your strength to push that person forward. Sometimes that's what make a movement, because every movement starts with one person, and then you join two, then you join three, then you join four. So sometimes you don't need to always be the one. I have to be at the top. And I was very inspired when I saw the work of our brother in Afrolongevity, and I said I would like to support, and I would like to also contribute so we can both push this thing forward. And that is why I'm up. It's 4:16 a.m. now, but this is
Yo,
very important to me.
Sina, you must go back to sleep now. Thank you so much. Neti, are you there?
Yes, I have maybe
Um,
one, two more questions. I'm happy.
No, 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 you have to go now. You've been up. I remember receiving a message from you 30 minutes past one your time. So you need to go to bed. Neti, yeah, closing remarks. Neti is our community leader in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Osi. And Sina, your work, I love it. In our tradition, we call you Sangoma. So I wish you can work your magic with your Sangoma practices to pray, or maybe the traditional works, to at least if we can maybe pray for our leaders, because in South Africa especially, I'll just speak on behalf of South Africa because I know much about South Africa. We do have beautiful frameworks that are written previously by previous ministers about digital uh, indigenous knowledges, that if they've been implemented by then, we wouldn't be here by now discussing this, because people would have been known before about how they should live and how they should protect themselves. So I wish we can have something, because we are led by unethical leaders who just think about money and being controlled for some money or something. But anyway, I think people like you and Osinakachi who just stand still and say we are going to move this because you care about the community and the people. So you are the God lives inside you. So we appreciate you a lot. We really honor you. So in my closing remarks, I don't know what to say, but let me just remind you about what is happening in Afro-longevity movement. There's a conference in Nigeria. For those who are in Nigeria, I think you are excited to attend that. And then we're also looking forward to the main event in Ethiopia. I hope people are already preparing themselves for that. We're also planning something in Limpopo, University of Limpopo. We will be sharing knowledge with the students around Limpopo and the leaders here. So your support will be much appreciated. For those who can come, yes, you can come. But for those who will appreciate to attend online, please communicate with us. Maybe there's something that we can do for those who cannot attend physically and then to attend online, so that we do have a large number of people present. Yeah, in that words, I'm saying a very good night to every one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my leader. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night, everyone. Good morning. I don't know what I'm going to tell you. I said, now good morning, good night, but you must rest because if you don't rest, you will break down. It's one of the longevity rules, the hallmarks of aging. Please take good care.